A very warm welcome to the second episode of Samvaad, the podcast on Indo-Pacific and the world by Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. Samvaad aims to provide informed, incisive, and precise discussions on issues pertinent to the Indo-Pacific. Today, we are pleased and truly honored to have a guest of eminence, Ambassador Gurjit Singh, to converse and deliberate the theme Connectivity as a Strategy in the Indo-Pacific. I am pleased to first invite our founder and honorary chairperson, Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, to kindly introduce our guest.
Thank you very much, Anindita. Let me at the outset welcome Ambassador Gurjit Singh to our first ever podcast by Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. I have been knowing him for decades. He was my senior in School of International Studies in JNU and alumni of JNU. One of the brightest friends that we had in SIS in late 70s and early 80s. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce Ambassador Gurjit Singh, who is a former ambassador of India to Germany, Indonesia, Ethiopia, ASEAN, and the African Union. He chaired the CII Business Task Force on Trilateral Cooperation in Africa, including the Asia Africa Growth Corridor with Japan. Of course, he often comes on Indian television and writes for journals. He's also an author of several books. His report on such cooperation in 2019 focused on private sector engagement to make even trilateral events successful. Ambassador Singh is associated with social impact investment movement and is working on expanding it in Africa, along with so many other trilateral initiatives, including with Japan, for B2B engagement. Singh joined the Indian Foreign Service a long time ago, way back in 1980, and in his 37 years of experience, he has been to very many countries in different positions, including ambassador. He is well known as a business-friendly diplomat also, who has who has often implemented developmental programs in many countries. A great author himself, he has written many books. A few of them are the Abalone Factor, an overview of the India-Japan business relations that won him the Bimal Sanyal Award for research by an Indian Foreign Service officer. His other books also include the Injera and the Paratha, enhancing Ethio-India relationship, Masala Bamboo, enhancing the India-Indonesia partnership. And he has been writing so many articles in newspapers and journals as well. It is actually a great honor for the Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies to host him in this event, first ever inaugural podcast by Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. Now I request Dr. Monish Tourangbam to raise a few questions to him and talk to him, and later I will come back again to ask him a personal questions towards the end of this event. Dr. Monish.
Thank you, Professor Mahapatra, for this opportunity. And it's indeed a pleasure for us, as the CV suggests, to have someone like Ambassador Gurjit Singh, who knows the bones and marrows of what we are going to talk about. First and foremost, sir, uh, infrastructure building and connectivity projects, they have always been there, right? The roads have been there, sea lanes of communication have been there, um, railways have been there, but suddenly, not suddenly, but let's say in recent years, we have seen this centrality that is provided to infrastructure building and connectivity projects whenever we talk about particularly the Indo-Pacific region, when we talk about foreign policies of major stakeholders of the Indo-Pacific region. So for our audience, could you throw some light on what why do you think there is this centrality that's being provided to connectivity projects and infrastructure building as a strategy among major stakeholders of the Indo-Pacific region?
Thank you, Monish, and thank you, Professor Mahapatra, for your very gracious words. It's a great pleasure for me to talk to people through your wonderful new forum. So, the question you put to me actually perplexes me because as a diplomat, we all think the world is flat and everything is going smoothly. So we do not really see that there is a churning. Connectivity has actually existed in what today we call the Indo-Pacific for millennia, and it kept up with the times. But when the concept was called the Asia Pacific, then it was largely an economic concept. So we had value chains, we had connectivity, but it was all focused only on trade, and there was no strategic intent beyond that. So in this Indo-Pacific area, if you look at ASEAN, which is the core, ASEAN plus three, which is ASEAN, Japan, Korea, and China, has been at the core since about 1976 when ASEAN was formed. In 1967, ASEAN is formed. 1976 onwards, APT starts. Now, China, Japan, and Korea were investing in infrastructure and economies through FDI, through loans into ASEAN countries. The investment into the Pacific Islands was less. And South Asia was on the fringes of the Asia Pacific concept. But once you have the expansion of ASEAN by including what is called the CLMV, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. This happens between 1995 and 1999, with Myanmar coming in 1997. Then more strategic intent starts, because now you're integrating a far larger area where the economic opportunities are not complementary. From the Indian point of view, from about 1992, the Look East policy begins. In 1976, Japan starts investing much more ODA into ASEAN. When Myanmar joins ASEAN for the first time, India has land connectivity to ASEAN. Till then, it's only a maritime connectivity. So, several things happen, giving you opportunities to enhance economic interaction, political interaction, people-to-people interaction. In this, main activity is focused on the Southeast Asian, what we call ASEAN member states. There is no cohesive activity in South Asia. It is more fragmented. And as I said, in the South Pacific, it is largely what the Australians are doing and not much else. It's distant, but requires connectivity among the islands. Now, when you have the same strategic flat world going on, there is no real champion which needs to be challenged or chaperoned. But when China starts becoming more aggressive economically, strategically, people to people. People to people meaning they weaponize tourism. Trade they use, today we complain about Western sanctions, but China uses imports from countries as a weapon. I will stop importing Filipino pineapples. I will stop importing your apple, this kind of stuff. And many countries are dependent on this. And strategically, they start altering borders, start taking over islands, or they start going to the South Pacific where previously they had no sway. So the Indo-Pacific concept which then emerges is not purely an economic concept. It is a strategic concept. And in this strategic concept, Chinese aggression is challenged. ASEAN by itself can't challenge because they are not a power concept. So ASEAN's friends, India, USA, Japan, Australia, we challenge. And this challenge then is in the trade field. If you look at RCEP, India goes out of it. You look at the TPP, they don't want China in it. That's strategic choices. When APEC was formed in 1989, nobody said keep China out. Or when you have uh, Quad and AUKUS, these are answers, responses to China. The BRI is the ultimate weaponization of infrastructure and connectivity. I've come back now to your question. So, when connectivity nowadays is seen in a new light because countries are starting to use it like a challenge and say, this is mine. So, what China does, they go and challenge Japan in projects which Japan had developed, like the Jakarta Bandung Railway, and push Indonesia to get Japanese out. And the irony is that till today, that project is not complete. So, BRI is a symbol that China wants to use its economic power, its then economic surplus, which it doesn't have now, capital surplus, to challenge the situation by using connectivity, economy, tourism, everything else as a challenge. And that is why today connectivity is repeatedly mentioned in all strategic documents. I hope I have answered your question why it is so important now.
Thank you so much, sir. Let me pick up from um, your idea on the strategic intent being a new sort of focus and the thing that is driving connectivity projects and infrastructure building, and what you said about BRI being an ultimate form of weaponization. Um, so if we look at BRI, really the dragon in the room. Um, we see that there is a view of BRI, and it's interesting that it's, I think if I'm not wrong, like 1 decade of the now BRI coming into picture. Um, for some, BRI is it's predatory economics, as the Americans would frame it. For us, it's an infringement on territorial sovereignty. Uh, and for many in South Asia and Southeast Asia, despite the concerns that BRI brings, somewhere you see that BRI is treated somewhat like a necessary evil, a monster that anyway you have to deal with, and you don't have much of an alternative. So just could you throw a little bit more light for our audience on your your idea of BRI as an ultimate weaponization and all the other paraphernalia or views and perspectives that surrounds the BRI?
So the hype of BRI, I have seen because in 2013, when China announced it in Jakarta, and that is the Maritime Silk Road, that aspect was announced. I was there. So there was great expectation that countries could benefit endlessly from Chinese largesse. It was not that countries like Chinese ideology or the China was a strategic option. No, it was simply that it was a source of funding.
Mm.
And that is why countries went to it. But in 2024, when the first decade of BRI is there and there will be a new BRI summit, I would like to see, did as many countries as the past attend in 2019, for instance? Or did many? We know, for instance, Italy has backed out. We know the Central European initiative has floundered. So it is not that every country found the panacea that they were looking for, because they were ready to take economic benefit, but were often not ready to pay the strategic cost. Now, in the case of ASEAN, now you rightly said India objects to BRI because in the CPEC through Pakistan, they violate our sovereignty. But in the case of ASEAN, there are 5 countries whose sovereignty is violated by China through encroachments in the 9-9. But those countries happen to be among the biggest recipients of BRI projects. So they have decided to deal with these two things on a different level. rather than link them and challenge BRI. But I think there's a growing realization that BRI is not a permanent solution. You have to treat each project and deal with it separately, because the Chinese way of doing things is built, but they don't think of how to plan and how to make profit, because their companies are not required to do that. So, very often projects do not have a bankable return built into them. And that is why many countries have become worried that when the time comes to start repaying the loan, how do you repay it? Because the project is not paying for itself. So you have to repay it from other heads, which upsets the budget of many countries. That is the trap they find themselves in. The second thing is the BRI is like an economic stimulus for the Chinese economy. They don't do any capacity building in the countries where the project is done. I visited an African country where they'd done a big project, and the people all told me that not a single local company was involved in any aspect of this development. There was no transfer of technology, there was no local capacity building. But that is where now strategically we call quality infrastructure. That is the buzzword. Quality infrastructure means not on Chinese terms. So that is the problem with BRI. As a funding mechanism, good idea. But is it helping everybody? Now, the image China has built up is that they are the biggest financier of infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific. Even with BRI, that's not true. The Japanese, with about 330 billion since 1976, are actually far ahead of them. But Japanese have not strategically placed their infrastructure. And the other misnomer I want to talk about, Chinese often say we are building regional connectivity. I have yet to see a project which actually connects two countries other than to themselves. The Laos railway, yes, connects to them. Laos connects to China. But where is the connectivity between ASEAN or something? For instance, there is an east-west corridor in the landmass of ASEAN. There's a north-south corridor which ESCAP and ADB look at, which Japan is partly looking at. There's no Chinese involvement in that. So this concept of regional connectivity is not implemented so far. It may happen in the future, I don't know. So therefore, there's a connectivity to themselves or within countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. This section I found it really interesting because it you really sort of like I think break up and hit into um, the the lack of visibility in the business and the economic model of BRI as such, and you're questioning even the regionalism of BRI as such, and I think I find it very interesting. And I know from your CV that you follow cinema very closely. So I think the kind of propagation that China was pushing across with BRI in pure Bollywood style, that line वही से शुरू होती है जहाँ हम खड़े होते हैं. I think what you said just kind of broke down that the propagation or perception that China was pushing across many of these countries that are in need of aid and assistance from China. Coming to our country, sir, many reports that come out from the West, or even the ones that come out of think tanks within India, you always find that the first starting line is almost that South Asia is the least integrated region in the world, and in questioning the capability and the political intention and the willingness of India's part to provide that leadership for connectivity and projects around South Asia, more particularly. Um, so, could you locate India in this landscape of emerging cooperation competition dynamic of infrastructure building and connectivity? And also, I'll add up to the next question, which is that every time we go into a conference, we keep hearing that India lacks in implementation. That's one of the major things that we keep hearing from recipient countries and countries which are partnering with us in South Asia. So, just could you throw some light on many of these aspects that are
On the second part,
yeah.
whenever a South Asian country, however close to China they may be, is in crisis, it is only we who are connected to them. If Maldives needs water, if the Sri Lankans have budget crisis, if Bangladesh has a cyclone, if Myanmar has an issue, if Nepal has an earthquake, I mean, even Pakistan, they had an earthquake, Afghanistan has the food crisis. So the connectivity of India is established. In a time of need, we are the only friend and the first friend, even tsunami. All right. But when you have time to think, then many of them use the occasion to disrupt this connectivity, which is a natural connectivity. So, unlike many other regions, the South Asian region's connectivity is essentially India based. You have very little to do with each other except through India. So, if you don't do it with India, you have a less integrated South Asia. This is what you have because Pakistan, for instance, has always been disruptionist. They would not even allow a motor vehicle act to be commonly used. So that is why, for instance, if you want to send wheat to Afghanistan, it is so difficult through Pakistan. The Chinese also contributed to all our neighbors and increased the economic stakes, making many of them think again that China is the panacea. But when you have a crisis, the Chinese are far away or unwilling. In all these cases, whether providing vaccines, providing budgetary support, providing wheat to Afghanistan, cyclone relief, disaster relief to Nepal, I think we are very efficient. I do not see the lack of efficiency. But when it comes to project implementation, there are problems. For instance, let's take 3, 4 kind of problems. Big power projects in Nepal and Bhutan habitually run behind schedule. But when you ask, it is not always our fault. There are local issues in it, local clearances, land, this, that, moving villages. Then you look at Sri Lanka. We have done many small projects of housing and all there, which actually have gone in a timely manner. You look at Bangladesh. Now about $12 billion of Indian lines of credit are going to Bangladesh. Single largest recipient out of about the 36 billion that India lends globally, 12 billion is to Bangladesh. Again, here, all the projects are not delayed because of us. Many of them require local land acquisition, local environmental clearances, other local clearances. That takes time. And if those timelines are not kept, then certainly things go down. But some of our biggest projects, which are actually funded entirely by us, like grants. So I must differentiate here. Projects in Nepal, Bhutan, and Myanmar, and if to an extent in Sri Lanka, are all grant projects. They don't have to be repaid. In Bangladesh, there are many grant projects, but said this $12 billion are loans. Now, we have got these 2 big projects, the Kaladan multimodal railway project, through Calcutta to Sitwe and reach Mizoram. Now, China has never attempted a multimodal project like this, ever. Other one is this trilateral highway, which also China has never done. But these have inbuilt problems in them because you have to coordinate with 3 countries. And out of these 3 countries, Myanmar has been a problem country, infrastructurally, strategically, politically. So implementing things there, building bridges, getting communication done, changing the attribute is different. So if you notice that when these projects started, they were actually an effort to bypass Bangladesh and link to Northeast India. Now with the relationship with Bangladesh being very good and Bangladesh having its own Indo-Pacific policy in consonance with ours, we are quite ready to do connectivity to the northeast of India with Bangladesh.
Mm.
So there is an India-Japan trilateral working for specifically Bangladesh, but with Myanmar, where currently Japan does not want to get involved, Japan is involved in the northeast of India through the Act East Forum. So like a juggling ball that we are doing of various. There are definitely a better speed and of implementation would have given us better marks, and which are definitely we have faltered. But as I said, it is not always only our fault. But yes, if we could get over our faults and have a better project implementation unit for each project, then it helps. You know what happens in India? I did an analysis in my book, The Harambe Factor. Why do projects often fail? It's because you have a team in India. Then people get transferred. The passion is lost. The new people often don't understand what was the whole purpose. So you must have long-term teams where people should be experts and only the policy makers should be transferable. The rest should be linked to the project and they should not go out. So they need not be in MEA, for instance. They can all be hired experts, consultants who will stay for duration of the project rather than transferable MEA office. So these are the kind of things that we can look at. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's a very important, I think, key takeaway from your answer. The element of continuity in projects, and I think we really need to sort of work on that and focus on bringing out more policy recommendations uh, based on that line of thinking, which is the continuity of expertise in projects. That brings me to my last question, which is I think we are going to have like uh, Delhi is going to have 3 days of holidays for the G20, and traffic rules are going to change. Um, we have just had the BRICS expansion in Johannesburg, and we have the continuity of the ASEAN India partnership. So connectivity and infrastructure building requires partnerships, and of course cannot be achieved in silos. If we are thinking of regionalism and greater good for the region and the world, so uh, help us unpack India's choice of bilateral and multilateral partnerships in this regard and the way forward.
Thank you. So when earlier I tried to explain the strategic connectivity options, today you see digital connectivity, 5G, underwater cables, both for marine domain awareness as well as for internet connectivity. Now, all these sound like simple functional ideas, but today all of them are strategies because you need to challenge the Chinese way. The Chinese want to control these, and we want a free and open Indo Pacific. So, these ideas, which were earlier implemented freely when internet was created, it was largely in the private sector. Nobody sought to control it. But today, China wants control of internet line. They want the 5G only their way. So today, other countries are coming in and saying this is not acceptable. Just as we will resist your control of the sea lanes, we will also resist these new technologies and ways to connect. So this becomes a challenge, a strategic challenge. Now, how do you do this? I think this is where we haven't yet found a way. The BRI is one unity because it is Chinese, the banks are Chinese, the implementers are Chinese, the approvals are Chinese. The entire procurement system is Chinese. Whereas various efforts through partners in the Indo-Pacific have not yet been successful. Japan, as I told you, is very big. But in order to reduce the cost of Japanese projects, it would be better to work with India. Because Indian companies have great EPC capacities and can reduce the cost of projects. After all, they have done many projects successfully in the developing countries. Similarly, Australia and the United States. Now, there is a US, India, Japan trilateral for infrastructure. But you don't hear about it anymore. When I started work on trilateral partnerships in 2018, this was very important. I went all the way to Washington to discuss it. Today, you don't hear about it. There is a Japan, Australia, US triangle of cooperation for infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific. Other than one project in the Pacific Islands, you don't see anything about it. There is a Japan EU, India EU connectivity partnership. There is the G7 Build Back Better. But where are they really challenging the BRI with actual projects? This is because multiple partners together, how do you have common procurement? Whereas in the case of China, it is everything is common. In our case, Japanese, Australian, US, Indian, this is the Quad initiative. Our procurement systems are different. Now you see the Quad vaccine initiative. It ultimately ended up exporting Indian made vaccines that imported technology from the US with financing from Japan and marketing support from Australia for manufacturing in India. That initiative has still not happened. Whatever the Quad vaccine initiative delivered was Indian made vaccines. So you see, even on something so robust on which all four were agreed and even the way forward was delineated, you still couldn't do it. So it requires a lot of coordination to have successful triangular or trilateral cooperation or even quadrilateral cooperation. But that is the only way forward if you want to challenge China. So I think that is where we all need to spend more time in working out common procurement mechanisms and how they will work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. On that note, I would like to request and invite Professor Mahapatra to pose the final question and take the conversation forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Monish.
Ambassador Singh, I'm really grateful to you for giving us so much of time and explaining things so beautifully. Your logic, your argument, your insightful comments, your set of recommendations, the way you described how the Chinese are making names and doing little, Indians are doing a lot of things, but not many people appreciate or talk about it. This has been fantastic. Now, we have started this podcast to disseminate this kind of information among the youth and other people, including the academics and the policymakers, if they want to watch someday. Uh, but we think that one of the things that we can learn from you, particularly for the youth also, in your 37 plus years of career, you have achieved so many things. But at the same time, you must have had very difficult time, a lot of obstacles, a lot of challenges. So, if you can give one or two examples from your experience, which can really energize the youth, give them some direction, inspire them how to meet the challenges, will be grateful.
Thank you, Professor Mahapatra, for your kind words. So, let me quickly say I can think of three big challenging moments in my career. The first one was in Sri Lanka when I was trapped and I was actually rescued by a Buddhist monk. But I don't have to tell you the whole story. If you Google my name and say one night in Sri Lanka, you will get that story of Vesak 1989 on that night, how we were trapped, Neeru and I both, and how then we were rescued. The second one was in 1998, 7th of August, when the first Al-Qaeda bombing in Africa took place in Nairobi. And we never realized that our embassy was hardly 60 meters away from the US embassy, which was the target. And our embassy shook and things fell on us and we all had to escape. That was providence. I have also written about that. It is a thing called one night, the Nairobi bombings. You can again, if you see my name and put the Nairobi bombings, it's been reproduced many times. There is a Netflix movie called The Looming Tower. about 9/11. But in the first two episodes, they actually cover this same Nairobi bombing, of which I luckily escaped. But let me come to a positive one. Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam went to Africa in 2004 and gave this vision that India and Africa should be connected digitally. So that project was developed and called the Pan African E Network Project. And by that time, I became the ambassador to Ethiopia and African Union and the co chair of the implementation committee. When we implemented that project I was there from 2005. So 2005 to 2009 was the implementation phase, and the project started in 2009. It continued for a decade. Those 4 years were amazing. How much improvisation, how much understanding, how to bring technology. Basically, we were linking Indian hospitals and Indian universities to African hospitals and universities through a vision of Dr. Kalam. And Dr. Kalam was so hands on that every time I visited India, even on holiday or work, I had to go and see him, and he would receive me and ask what is going on. Are you facing any difficulty? And if I did, he would solve it. But this was perhaps India's biggest project in Africa. And I felt so good when it came online because you could see classes, you could see people with Indian teachers learning. And Ethiopia, for instance, where they did the pilot project, the first two rounds of people who did MA all went on to head departments in 14 new universities. It was one of the best capacity building projects. Then I went once to Rwanda and Burundi in 2012 before I left Africa. And there I saw lines of people waiting for telemedicine consultations with Indian doctors. So I have seen lives being touched, common lives being touched. Now, normally in the foreign service, you don't get to see this. You are dealing at a rare level, right? But I have seen lives being touched through this project. So for me, that remains one of the most valuable memories and experiences that I gathered in my service.
Thank you very much. This is so inspiring. Life is full of challenges. Normally, when we see the examples of others who have succeeded in life, we always see the outcome. But it is important that we must get into the background and see it in order to reach a goal. What kind of challenges a person can face, and we have learned a great deal from you. I personally learned a great deal from your arguments, your logic, some of the facts which are not very well known. Only experts will be dealing with it or will know. But now I'm sure many people who are going to watch this video in the future are going to learn a great deal, and we'll come back again to you, Ambassador, at a future date to get some more insight from you on some of the topic. And I thank you very much again on behalf of all my colleagues in the Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mahapatra, and thank you, Kalanga Institute. Very happy to have been with you.